The Beta's daughter pulled 15 wolves from the freezing water, until only the Alpha King was left. Let go of the rope, Adalind. The ice will take you both. The wind screamed the words more than the voice in her head did, tearing through the parka that had once belonged to her father. Adalind Moorcrest dug her boots into the sludge of the frozen bank, her muscles screaming, the hemp rope biting into her raw, bleeding palms. I don't... Leave. Wolves behind, she gritted out, her breath misting into ice crystals before her eyes. 15 bodies bobbed in the black, churning stew of the broken lake. 14 were silent. One, the largest, the darkest, was thrashing, fighting the lethal pull of the undercurrent. He growled, a sound of defiance that shook the frost from the hemlock trees. Then die with them, you fool, the wind seemed to whisper. Adalind screamed, a primal sound of exertion that ripped from her throat and heaved. The rope went taut. Destiny didn't knock. It froze you to the bone and dared you to survive. The cold was not a temperature here in the northern reach. It was a predator. It had teeth, it had weight, and tonight, it had an appetite. Adalind Moorcrest, the exiled daughter of the disgraced Beta of the Moorcrest pack, fell to her knees in the snow. Her chest heaved, sucking in air that felt like swallowed glass. Before her lay the aftermath of a massacre disguised as an accident. She had watched from the ridge, helpless, as the ice bridge collapsed. A battalion of wolves, heavy with armor and arrogance, had plunged into the Silver Lake. She had run down the scree, sliding, tearing her trousers, abandoning caution to throw her hauling ropes into the dark water. She had pulled, gods, she had pulled until the capillaries in her eyes burst. One by one, she had dragged them to the stony shore. Wolf number 1, a grey scout, dead before he hit the bank. Wolf number 2 through 7, soldiers, eyes open, glazed with the white film of hypothermia. Gone, 8 through 14. The lieutenants, their heavy fur coats, usually their protection, had become waterlogged anchors dragging them down. She crawled over the frozen pebbles, checking pulses with fingers, so numb they felt like wooden dowels. Nothing. 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 14 corpses steamed in the freezing air, a gruesome buffet for the crows that would come at dawn. Useless, she hissed at herself, tears freezing on her lashes. You saved nothing. A low, gurgling cough shattered the silence. Adalind whipped her head around. The 15th wolf, the one she had nearly drowned trying to leverage out of the deep center channel. He was massive, a midnight black beast that dwarfed the others, his fur matted with ice and blood. He lay on his side, his flank heaving with a violent, ragged rhythm. She scrambled over to him, her hands hovering. Shifters usually healed fast, but the Silver Lake was cursed. Its waters drained thermal energy faster than magic could replenish it. As she watched, the great beast shuddered, bones cracking and rearranging with sickening wet snaps. The shift was forced, brutalized by the cold. Where the wolf had been, a man now lay curled in the snow. He was stark naked, his skin the color of marble, violently shivering. But it was his face that made Adalind recoil, her breath hitching in her throat. Even blue-lipped and half-dead, the face was unmistakable. The sharp, aristocratic jawline, the scar running through his left eyebrow, the sheer aura of dominance that radiated off him like heat waves. Xyler Frostborn, the Alpha King, the tyrant of the North, the man who had signed her father's execution order, or so the rumors claimed. Adalind sat back on her heels, the snow soaking through her pants. She looked at the 14 dead soldiers, then at the king who lived. Of course, she whispered bitterly, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her chest. Fate kills the innocent and spares the devil. She reached for the knife strapped to her boot. It would be so easy. A slide of steel across the throat, Justice for her father. Justice for the exile that had forced her to live in a rotting cabin on the edge of nowhere. Xyla's eyes snapped open. They weren't human eyes. They were liquid gold, rimmed with a violet so dark it looked black. The Alpha command in them was dim, flickering like a dying candle. But it was there. He couldn't speak, his jaw locked with tremors, but he stared at the knife in her hand. He didn't plead. He didn't look afraid. He looked furious. Furious that he was dying, furious that he was weak, furious that his end had come at the hands of a girl in a ragged parka. Adelind's grip on the knife tightened. The wind howled, pushing her hair into her face. Kill him, the memory of her father urged. End the Frostborn line. She looked at the dead wolves. Then she looked at the shivering, hateful man who was fighting to keep his eyes open. Damn you, she swore. She sheathed the knife. Adalind grabbed his arm, draping it over her shoulder. He was dead weight, dense with muscle and bone. She groaned, her knees buckling as she tried to stand. He was a giant, easily 6'5", and she was a beta female of average height. Walk, you tyrant, she gritted out, slapping his frozen cheek. Walk, or I leave you for the scavengers. Somehow the command, or the insult, penetrated the fog of his hypothermia. Xyla's legs moved. It wasn't walking. It was a series of controlled stumbles. Step, drag, step, drag. They moved away from the graveyard of the shoreline, up the winding path toward the faint glow of her cabin. Adalind didn't look back at the 14 dead. She was too busy saving the one man she should have let drown. The cabin was small, built of rough-hewn pine and smelling of dried sage and wood smoke. To Adalind, it was a sanctuary. To the man she dumped onto the rug before the hearth, it likely looked like a hovel. She worked with the efficiency of a field medic. She stripped the wet clothes from her own body, pulling on dry wool thermals before turning her attention to the king. Modesty was a luxury for the warm. Survival was for the naked. She piled blankets onto him, furs she had trapped herself, thick wool quilts. He was still shivering violently, his teeth chattering with a sound like grinding stones. It wasn't enough. The core chill of the Silver Lake was settling into his marrow. If she didn't raise his body temperature immediately, his heart would stop. I hate you for making me do this, she muttered. Adalind climbed under the furs with him, skin to skin. It was the only way. She pressed her warm body against his icy one, wrapping her limbs around him. The shock of his cold skin made her gasp, but she held on, rubbing his back, his arms, trying to generate friction. Breathe, she commanded softly, her mouth near his ear. Fight it, Xyla. For an hour, they lay there in the firelight. Slowly, the violent tremors subsided into deep, rhythmic shudders. His skin began to lose the marble pallor, flushing a faint, healthy pink. Adalind drifted, exhausted. The smell of him filled her nose, not the metallic tang of the lake anymore, but something richer. Cedar. Rain. And something sharp, like ozone before a lightning strike. It was intoxicating, terrifyingly pleasant. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, the world had flipped. Adalind woke with a gasp, pinned to the floorboards. The furs were thrown aside. Xyla Frostborn was hovering over her, his forearm pressed against her throat, not crushing, but threatening. He was alive. He was warm. And he was lethal. Who are you? His voice was a ruined rasp, damaged by the water, but the authority was intact. Adalind didn't struggle. Fighting an alpha in close quarters was suicide, even an injured one. She stared up into those gold-violet eyes. The woman who spent 3 hours dragging your carcass out of a lake and warming you up. You're welcome. Xyla's eyes narrowed. He scanned her face, looking for a threat, a lie. He seemed confused by the lack of fear in her scent. You have a knife in your boot. If I wanted to use it, your throat would be slit right now, Adalind snapped. Get off me. He hesitated, the paranoia of a king warring with the logic of the situation. Slowly, he pulled his arm back, sitting up on his haunches. He looked around the humble cabin, the drying herbs, the simple furniture. My men, he said, his back to her. The 14 who were with me. Dead, Adalind said bluntly, sitting up and pulling a blanket around her shoulders. All of them. The cold took them before I could get them to shore. Zyla's back muscles tensed, shifting like tectonic plates under his skin. He didn't grieve openly. Kings didn't have that luxury, but the air in the room grew heavier, charged with suppressed rage. It wasn't an accident, he said, his voice low. The ice bridge? It was rigged, soaked with accelerant and weakened with earth magic. He turned to look at her, his gaze piercing. Someone wanted the Alpha King and his elite guard erased from history. Adalind stood up, her legs shaky. She moved to the small kitchenette to pour hot broth from a kettle. Well, they failed, mostly. She handed him a mug. Drink, you're still recovering. He took the mug, his fingers brushing hers. A spark, audible, painful, snapped between them. Zyla recoiled, spilling a drop of broth. Adalind jerked her hand back, clutching it to her chest. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Mate, the word hung in the silence, unsaid but screaming. Zyla looked at her with a new, horrified expression. He sniffed the air, really smelling her for the first time. He smelled the sage, the wood smoke, and the beta bloodline he had decimated years ago. Moorcrest, he whispered, recognizing the scent signature. You are Iestyn's sister? Or Adalind, she corrected, her voice cold. Daughter of Beta Harek Moorcrest, the man you executed for treason 5 years ago. The irony landed between them like a physical blow. The Alpha King had just discovered his fated mate was the daughter of the man he had killed, living in exile, who had just saved his life. Zyla let out a dark, mirthless laugh. Fate has a sick sense of humor. On that, Adalind said, retreating to the far side of the room and grabbing her knife for comfort. We agree. The blizzard hit an hour later, sealing the cabin in a tomb of white. There would be no leaving, no rescue parties, no escape. Just the two of them, trapped in a space smaller than the king's royal dressing room. Zyla sat by the fire, wearing a spare set of her father's clothes. The flannel shirt was tight across his shoulders, the sleeves rolling up to expose thick forearms scarred from countless battles. He watched Adalind as she skinned a rabbit for a stew. You live alone, he stated. It wasn't a question. Exiles usually do, she replied, not looking up. The knife worked deftly. The packlands are forbidden to me. The human cities are too loud. The reach is quiet. It's lonely. It's safe. She threw the meat into the pot. Or it was, until 15 wolves fell into my front yard. Zyla winced slightly as he shifted. His healing was kicking in, but the magical drain of the lake left him sluggish. Tell me exactly what you saw on the bridge. Adalind wiped her hands on a rag. I saw the convoy. You were riding heavy. Too heavy for the old ice, but it should have held. Then I saw a flash from the tree line. Green light. Earth magic. Zevran, Zyla growled. The name dripped with venom. Adalind paused. Zevran Witshaw? Your High Councilman. He has been urging me to inspect the northern borders for months, Zyla said, his eyes staring into the flames. He insisted I take the elite guard. He wanted me vulnerable. He wanted the throne. Zevran is a politician, not a mage, Adalind argued. He couldn't cast earth magic. No, but his mistress can. Zyla looked at Adalind. Briella Stormwell. Adalind felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Briella Stormwell was a name whispered in fear, even in the exile lands. A sorceress of immense power and, rumour had it, Xyla's former lover. So, Adolin crossed her arms, your ex-girlfriend and your advisor plotted to drown you, a classic court romance. Briella was never my lover, Xyla corrected sharply. She was a candidate for queen. I rejected her. She does not handle rejection well. Evidently. They will assume I am dead, Xyla mused, pacing the small room. The floorboards creaked under his weight. By tomorrow morning, Zevran will declare himself regent. By the end of the week, he will be crowned. I need to get back to the capital. You can't, Adolin pointed to the frosted window. The pass is blocked, and even if it wasn't, you're weak. You can barely hold a cup, let alone a sword. If you go back now, Zevran finishes the job. Xyla stopped pacing and loomed over her. The proximity was dizzying. The mate bond was a dull thrum in her blood, urging her to comfort him, to submit, to claim. She fought it with every ounce of her willpower. I am the Alpha King, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I do not hide in cabins while rats steal my crown. You do if you want to live. Adolin stood her ground, looking up at him. She poked him hard in the chest. You are not a king here, Xyla. You are a refugee, my refugee, and until this storm breaks, you do what I say. Xyla looked down at her finger on his chest. Most wolves would be throat-ripped for such insolence, but he didn't pull away. He stared at her, fascination warring with irritation. You have your father's stubbornness, he noted, and you have your executioner's charm. The tension broke with a sudden, violent banging on the cabin door. Both of them froze. Xyla's hand instinctively went to his waist for a sword that wasn't there. Adolind grabbed the skinning knife from the table. Adolind! A voice roared from outside, muffled by the wind. Open up! We found the tracks! Adolind's face paled. It's Iestyn. Xyla frowned. Who is Iestyn? My brother, she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. The current beta of Moorcrest. He works for Zevran, if he finds you here. He kills me, Xyla finished. And then he kills me for harboring you. The door shook again, the wood splintering under a heavy blow. Open the door, Addy. We know you pulled someone out of the water. Give him to us, and maybe Zevran will let you keep your miserable life. Adolind looked at Xyla. The Alpha King looked back. For a moment, they weren't enemies, or king and exile. They were conspirators. Hide, she breathed. I do not. Hide! She shoved him toward the trapdoor beneath the rug, the root cellar. If you die, Zevran wins. Get in! Xyla gritted his teeth, his pride fighting his survival instinct. But the door hinges shrieked, giving way. He dropped into the dark hole. Adolind kicked the rug over it, just as the front door exploded inward. Snow swirled into the room, followed by 3 large wolves. The center one shifted, bones cracking, rising to stand as a man with cruel eyes and a sneer that matched Adolind's own. Hello, little sister, Iestyn Moorheart grinned. It smells like wet dog in here, and royalty. Adolind gripped her knife, standing directly over the trapdoor. You're trespassing, Iestyn. And you're treasonous. Iestyn stepped forward, sniffing the air. He looked at the 2 steaming mugs on the table. 2 cups, how cozy. He drew a long, serrated blade. Where is the king, Adolind? Tell me, and I'll make it quick. Beneath the floorboards, in the dark, Xyla Frostborn listened to the man threaten his mate. His hands curled into fists, his claws extending, scraping against the dirt. The beast inside him roared, demanding blood. Touch her, Xyla thought, his eyes glowing in the pitch black. Touch her, and I will burn the world down. The silence in the cabin was heavier than the snow piling against the walls. Adolind stood her ground, the skinning knife trembling slightly in her grip, while her brother, Iestyn, paced the small room like a caged tiger. The two other wolves remained by the door, blocking the only exit, their eyes gleaming with predatory amusement. "You're quiet, Addy," Iestyn sneered, kicking a chair aside. "Usually you have plenty to say about family loyalty, or is that only when you're defending traitors?" "The only traitor here is you," Adalind spat, her voice steady, despite the rapid thudding of her heart. "Breaking into an exile's home, threatening your own blood. Father would be proud." Iestyn's face twisted. He lunged forward, backhanding her across the face. The force of the blow sent her stumbling back, tasting copper. "Do not speak his name. He died because he was weak, because he wouldn't do what was necessary to secure our pack's future." Adalind wiped the blood from her lip, her eyes flashing. She stepped back, positioning herself directly over the trapdoor's latch. "And what is necessary, Iestyn? Murdering a king?" Iestyn froze. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "So, he is here." He didn't need a confirmation. He could smell the fear spiking in her scent. He could smell the lingering ozone of the Alpha King. "Search the place," Iestyn commanded the guards. "Tear it apart." "No." Adalind slashed out with her knife as a guard reached for the cupboard. The guard laughed, catching her wrist easily and twisting. She cried out, the knife clattering to the floor. "Don't hurt her yet," Iestyn said lazily. "She needs to watch us skin him first." Iestyn walked to the center of the rug. Adalind gasped as he stomped his boot down, right over the hidden hollow. The wood groaned. "Hollow," Iestyn murmured. He looked at Adalind, his eyes dead. "Move." "Go to hell." Iestyn grabbed her by the hair, dragging her off the rug and throwing her against the hearth. Adalind hit the stones hard, her vision swimming. She watched, helpless, as Iestyn kicked the rug aside and reached for the iron ring of the trapdoor. "Come out, your majesty!" Iestyn roared, flinging the door open. "Your carriage awaits." He reached down into the darkness, expecting to drag out a weakened, half-frozen invalid. He was wrong. A roar shook the foundations of the cabin, a sound so deep, so primal, it vibrated in Adalind's teeth. A hand, black with dirt and extended claws, shot out of the hole and seized Iestyn by the throat. There was a sickening crunch. Iestyn didn't even have time to scream. He was yanked downward with terrifying force, disappearing into the cellar. There were sounds of a violent struggle, wet tearing noises, and then silence. The two guards stared at the hole, paralyzed by shock. Then Xyla Frostborn rose from the pit. He looked like a demon from the old tales. Dirt smeared his face, masking the aristocracy of his features. His eyes were glowing molten gold. The violet rims expanded until his irises were nearly black. He was shirtless, his chest heaving, blood that wasn't his dripping from his claws. He didn't look weak. He looked like the god of war. "My turn," Xyla growled. The guards snapped out of their trance. They shifted instantly, fur bursting through clothes, transforming into massive timber wolves. They lunged. Adalind scrambled for her knife. "Xyla, look out!" The first wolf went for Xyla's throat. The king didn't dodge. He caught the wolf in midair, his hands clamping around its muzzle and neck. With a roar of exertion, he twisted. The wolf fell limp, tossing aside like a rag doll, but the effort cost him. Xyla stumbled, his knees buckling. The magical drain of the lake was still there. The adrenaline was just a temporary fix. The second wolf, Iestyn's lieutenant, saw the opening. He snarled and bit deep into Xyla's shoulder, dragging him to the ground. Xyla shouted in pain, thrashing, but the wolf had the leverage. It went for the kill strike, jaws snapping toward the jugular. "Hey!" The wolf turned its head at the shout. Adalind stood there, holding a heavy cast-iron skillet she had grabbed from the fire. The metal was glowing red-hot on the bottom. She swung it with all her might. The searing iron connected with the wolf's snout. The beast yelped, a high-pitched sound of agony, and released Xyla to paw at its burned face. That second was all Xyla needed. He surged up, driving his claws into the wolf's chest, ending it. Silence fell over the cabin again, broken only by the howling wind outside and their ragged breathing. 3 dead wolves. Her brother. Dead in the cellar. The king, bleeding on her floor. Adalind dropped the skillet, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't make a fist. She looked at the open trapdoor. He was my brother, she whispered, the shock setting in. Xyla stood up slowly, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The gold in his eyes faded, replaced by pain and exhaustion. He looked at the trapdoor, then at Adalind. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't apologize. He was your executioner, Xyla said roughly. We have to go. Now. Go? In this? Adalind gestured to the window, where the blizzard was a white wall. Zevran will not send just 3, Xyla rasped. He grabbed his coat, her father's coat, from the chair. If Yestin doesn't check in within the hour, a battalion will be here. We are dead if we stay. Adalind looked around her home, her sanctuary. It was a slaughterhouse now. She couldn't stay here, not with the bodies, not with the memories. She grabbed her pack, stuffing it with dried meat, herbs, bandages, and a map. She took her father's hunting bow from the mantel. We take the Ridge Pass, she said, her voice hollow but determined. It's suicide in this weather, but they won't track us there. Xyla nodded. He moved to the door, paused, and looked back at her. Adalind. She looked up, tears finally spilling over. You saved me again, he said softly. Don't get used to it. She wiped her eyes furiously. Let's go. They stepped out into the white void, leaving the warmth, the dead, and Adalind's past behind them. The wind on the ridge was not wind. It was a physical assault. It shoved them, bit them, tried to peel the skin from their faces. They had been walking for 6 hours, or maybe 6 days. Time had lost its meaning in the whiteout. Adalind led the way, tethered to Xyla by a length of rope around their waists, so they wouldn't lose each other in the blindness of the snow. She trudged through thigh-deep drifts, using her bow as a walking stick. Xyla was failing. She could feel it in the tension of the rope. He was lagging, stumbling more often. The wound on his shoulder, though she had bound it, was leaking heat he couldn't afford to lose. The Silver Lake's curse was still in his veins, preventing his wolf from fully taking over to protect him. "Keep moving!" she yelled over the gale, though she couldn't even hear herself. The rope went taut and didn't slacken. Adalind turned back. Xyla was on his knees. He wasn't trying to get up. She fought her way back to him. His skin was grey, his lips blue. Ice had crusted over his eyelashes, sealing his eyes shut. "Xyla!" She fell to her knees beside him, shaking his shoulders. "Get up! If you stop, you die!" "Can't," he mumbled, his voice thick and slurred. "Legs gone. Leave me. Order. As king, leave me." "I don't take orders from corpses," Adalind screamed. She looked around frantically. White, nothing but white. But wait. To the left, a shadow in the rock face. A fissure. A cave. "Up!" She grabbed him under the arms. "One last push. Just 10 yards. Come on, you stubborn alpha." She heaved. He groaned, summoning the last dregs of his strength to push with his legs. Together, a clumsy, desperate, 2-headed beast, they staggered toward the dark slit in the stone. They collapsed inside. The wind instantly dropped to a dull roar, cut off by the rock walls. It was dark, smelling of damp earth and old bear scat. But it was dry. Adalind didn't rest. She fumbled with her pack, her frozen fingers numb, pulling out a fire starter and a bundle of dry moss she kept wrapped in oilcloth. Spark. Spark. Catch. A tiny flame bloomed. She fed it twigs, then larger branches she found near the cave mouth. Soon a small fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She turned to Xyla. He was unconscious. "No, no, no," she whispered. She stripped his wet coat off, then his shirt. The bandage on his shoulder was soaked through, but it was the black veins radiating from the bite mark that terrified her. Poison. Yestin's lieutenant had coated his teeth in something. Wolfsbane? No. Something magical. Necrotic. She needed to draw it out. Adalind took a handful of snow and melted it in a tin cup over the fire. She added dried drawing herbs, plantain and charcoal. Then she did the only thing she could. She took her knife and reopened the wound. Xyla jerked in his sleep, a moan of pain escaping his lips. "I'm sorry," she wept, applying the poultice. "I'm so sorry." She worked for an hour, cleaning, binding, praying to gods she didn't believe in. Finally, his breathing evened out. The black lines stopped spreading. Exhausted, Adalind curled up next to the fire. She shouldn't sleep. She needed to keep watch. But the warmth was a siren song. "Why?" The voice was weak, coming from the other side of the fire. Adalind started. Xyla was watching her. His eyes were clear, the gold dull but present. "Why what?" she asked, hugging her knees. "Why save me? I killed your father. I am the reason you live in a shack. I am the reason your brother is dead." Adalind looked into the fire. The flames licked at the wood, consuming it. "My father," she began, her voice quiet, "wrote me a letter before he died. He bribed a guard to smuggle it out." Xyla went still. "I didn't know. He told me that he was being framed, that evidence was planted in his solar. He told me that the king was young, hot-headed, and being manipulated by shadows in his court. He told me not to hate you." She looked up at Xyla, tears streaming down her face. "He told me to pity you, because you were surrounded by wolves who wanted to eat you, and you didn't even know it." Xyla looked like she had slapped him. He closed his eyes, a look of profound pain crossing his face. "I signed the order," he whispered. "Zevran brought me the letters. They were in Harek's handwriting. They detailed a plot to assassinate my mother. I was blind with rage. I didn't even give him a trial." "No," Adalind said softly. "You didn't." "I am a monster," he said. "Yes," Adalind agreed. She crawled over to him, not to attack, but to check his forehead. It was cool. The fever had broken. "But you are a monster who is trying to fix his mistakes. And my father, he believed in the crown, even when it killed him. So I am saving the crown. Not the man." Xyla looked at her, his hand reaching out to cover hers where it rested on his forehead. His skin was rough, calloused. The sparks that flew between them were gentle now, a hum of connection rather than a shock. "You are extraordinary, Adalind Moorcrest," he murmured. "If we survive this, I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness." Adalind pulled her hand away, her heart aching. "Servivial first, Your Majesty. Redemption later." She moved back to her side of the fire. But as she drifted off to sleep, she felt his gaze on her, heavy and warm, guarding her from the dark. The blizzard broke 2 days later. The world emerged crisp, blindingly bright, and silent. They moved faster now. Xyla was healing. The poison had left a nasty scar, but his strength was returning. He insisted on breaking the trail through the snow, using his superior mass to carve a path for her. They were descending into the valleys of the moon, a dense, ancient forest that separated the northern reach from the capital. It was neutral territory, unclaimed by any pack, mostly because it was rumored to be haunted. "We need to find a way to contact the southern garrison," Xyla said, scanning the tree line. "General Kyle is loyal. If I can reach him, I can rally the army." "The nearest outpost is at Blackwood Crossing," Adalind said, checking her mental map. "It's a day's walk, but we have to cross the river." "The bridge will be guarded," Xyla noted. "Then we don't use the bridge." They reached the riverbank by midday. The water wasn't frozen here, the current was too fast. It was a churning ribbon of grey sludge. "We swim?" Xyla looked at her skeptically. "After pulling you out of one frozen body of water, I am in no rush to enter another." "No swimming," Adalind pointed up. "We climb." Spanning the river, high up in the ancient redwoods, was a series of old logging cables. They were rusted, swaying in the breeze, but they were the only way across unseen. "You cannot be serious," Xyla muttered. "Scared of heights, Alpha?" Adalind teased, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. It was the first time she had smiled in days. Xyla stared at her mouth. He seemed to forget the river, the cold, the danger. "Terrified," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "But I will follow you." They climbed the massive trees, the bark rough under their hands. Adalind went first, shimmying across the cable with the grace of a squirrel. Xyla followed, heavier, shaking the line, but holding on with grim determination. They were halfway across, suspended 100 feet above the raging river, when the air suddenly crackled. Snap! A bolt of green energy sizzled past Adalind's ear, singeing her hair. She froze, looking down toward the far bank. Standing there, wrapped in a cloak of white fur that blended perfectly with the snow, was a woman. Her hair was flame red, a stark contrast to the winter world. She held a staff of twisted weirwood, the tip glowing with emerald light. Briella Stormwell. "Leaving so soon, Xyla?" Her voice, amplified by magic, echoed through the canyon. "We haven't even had our reunion," Xyla roared, hanging from the cable with one hand. "Briella, let us pass, and I will spare your life when I retake my throne." Briella laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, my sweet, stupid king, you have no throne. Zevran was crowned this morning. The realm believes you died a tragic hero. I am just here to tie up the loose ends." She raised her staff again. This time she didn't aim at them. She aimed at the anchor point of the cable on the far tree. "No!" Adalind screamed. A blast of green fire hit the tree. The metal cable groaned, heated to white hot in a second, and snapped. The world dropped. Adalind and Xyla plummeted toward the river, but Adalind didn't hit the water. In midair, Xyla released the cable and kicked off the empty air. He collided with Adalind, wrapping his massive body around hers, shielding her. They hit the water with the force of a car crash. The cold was shocking, stealing the breath from their lungs. The current grabbed them instantly, tumbling them over rocks, spinning them into the deep. Xyla held on. His grip was iron. He took the brunt of every impact, his body slamming against boulders so she wouldn't have to. They were swept downstream for miles, battered and drowning. Finally, the river widened, slowed, and spat them out onto a sandbar. Xyla dragged Adalind onto the dry ground. She was coughing up water, shivering violently. "Adalind," he gasped, crawling over to her. "Are you hurt? Check your bones." I'm okay," she choked out. She looked at him. He was limping badly, and blood was streaming from a gash on his forehead. "You shielded me." "Always," he breathed. He collapsed onto his back, staring up at the grey sky. "She knows we're alive. She will hunt us now, not with soldiers, with magic." Adalind crawled over to him, hovering over his face. "Then we stop running. We can't beat her in a straight fight, Xyla. She has the high ground. She has the magic." "So what do we do?" Xyla looked at her, his eyes searching hers for an answer. He looked lost. The king was gone. Only the man remained. Adalind reached out, brushing the wet hair from his forehead. Her fingers lingered on the scar. "We stop playing by their rules," she said, a dangerous glint entering her eyes. "We don't go to the garrison. We don't go to the army. Where do we go?" "The crypts," Adalind said. "The old kings. The legends say the first Frostborn was buried with a weapon that could sever magic." Xyla's eyes widened. "That is a myth, a nursery rhyme." My father spent 20 years researching nursery rhymes, Adalind said. He found the map. I have it memorized. Xyla stared at her. You are the most dangerous woman in this kingdom. I know, she whispered. She leaned down. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was magnetism. Gravity. She kissed him. His lips were cold, tasting of river water and blood, but the heat that exploded between them was volcanic. Xyla groaned, his hand tangling in her wet hair, pulling her deeper. It was a kiss of desperation, of survival, of a bond that defied logic and history. For a moment, there was no snow, no traitor, no crown, just the Alpha and the Beta, claiming each other in the wreckage. Adalind pulled back, breathless, her forehead resting against his. We survive, she commanded. Xyla looked at her with fierce, burning devotion. We reign. But deep in the woods, the green light pulsed again, and the shadows began to take the shape of wolves made of ice and earth, hunting for a heartbeat. The crypts of the old kings were not meant for the living. Buried deep beneath the root systems of the valleys of the moon, they were a labyrinth of stone and silence, guarded by wards that hadn't tasted blood in 1,000 years. Adalind held the torch, the flame sputtering in the stagnant air. Watch your step, she whispered, her voice echoing too loudly in the gloom. My father's note said the floor tiles are pressure sensitive. One wrong step, and the ceiling comes down. Xyla followed close behind her, his hand resting on the hilt of a rusted sword he had scavenged from a fallen traveller's grave outside. He looked at the intricate carvings on the walls, murals of wolves fighting demons, of kings sacrificing their hearts for power. I never believed these places existed, Xyla admitted, his voice hushed. The tutors in the palace said the old kings were myths, metaphors for the unification of the Pax. Kings like to rewrite history to make themselves the beginning of it, Adalind murmured, counting the tiles. 3 steps forward. 2 left. Don't touch the black stones. They moved deeper, the air growing colder, smelling of dust and dried rosemary. The tension between them was a physical weight. Since the kiss by the river, the dynamic had shifted. He wasn't just her king, and she wasn't just his savior. They were partners, predestined. They reached a massive circular door made of obsidian. There was no handle, only a depression in the center, shaped like a wolf's paw, lined with silver. The blood lock, Adalind said, holding the torch high. Only a direct descendant of the Frostborn line can open it. It requires a sacrifice. Xyla stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. He sliced his palm with the edge of the rusted blade and pressed his bleeding hand into the stone depression. I, Xyla Frostborn, son of Kaelin, demand entry, he commanded. The stone drank his blood. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep, grinding rumble shook the floor. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the massive obsidian slab began to rotate, grinding against millennia of stone. The chamber beyond was small, illuminated by a single shaft of moonlight that shouldn't have been able to reach this deep underground. In the center, on a pedestal of white marble, lay a weapon. It wasn't a sword. It was a pair of gauntlets. They were made of a metal that seemed to absorb the light, dark, jagged, and pulsing with a faint blue rhythm. The knuckles were set with shards of meteor glass. The void talons, Adalind breathed, her eyes wide. My father thought it was a spear. He was wrong. Xyla approached the pedestal. What do? They don't just cut flesh, Adalind recited from memory. They sever magical tethers. They can rip the magic out of a witch or a wolf. Xyla reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the cold metal, the gauntlets snapped open like living things. He slid his hands inside. Clang. They clamped onto his forearms, the metal fusing with his skin. Xyla fell to his knees, screaming as blue veins of power shot up his arms, turning his eyes a blinding electric white. "Xyla!" Adolin dropped the torch and rushed to him. "Stay back!" he roared, his voice layered with the growl of 1,000 ancestors. He slammed his fist into the stone floor. Boom! A shockwave of pure force rippled out, cracking the stone. The magic in the room vanished. The torches went out. The air went still. Xyla panted, hunching over. Slowly the light faded from his eyes, returning to their gold-violet hue. He looked at his hands. The gauntlets were now a part of him, humming with a terrifying, silent hunger. "I can feel it," he whispered, looking at Adalind with fear and awe. "I can feel the ley lines of the earth. I can feel everything." Adalind reached out and touched the cold metal of his armored hand. "Can you control it?" Xyla looked at her, his expression hardening into the visage of the king he was born to be. "To kill Briella Stormwell?" he growled, standing up and clenching his fists, the meteor glass sparking. "I will control the storm itself." Ironhold, the capital city, was draped in black and gold. Black for the death of King Xyla, and gold for the coronation of King Zevran. The mood in the streets was not celebratory. The common folk huddled in their coats, whispering. Xyla had been stern, yes, but he had been just. Zevran was known for his excesses and his cruelty. The air smelled of roasted meat and fear. In the shadows of the alleyways, two figures moved, cloaked in heavy wool peasant hoods. "The ceremony begins at high noon," Adalind whispered, checking the position of the sun. "Zevran will be in the great hall. Briella will be by his side to perform the anointing." "We can't just walk in the front door," Xyla rumbled. He was wearing a cloak that barely concealed the bulk of the void talons on his arms. "We aren't," Adalind smirked, pulling a rusty iron key from her tunic. "My father didn't just study history. He built the palace's sewer drainage system." Xyla looked at the grate she was pointing to, a sludge-filled tunnel. "You want the King of the North to crawl through excrement?" "I want the King of the North to survive," she retorted, unlocking the grate. "Ladies first." They moved through the damp, reeking tunnels beneath the city. Above them, they could hear the thrum of drums, the fanfare of trumpets. Adalind led them with unerring accuracy, counting turns, avoiding the main pipes where the water level was high. They emerged an hour later in the royal crypts beneath the great hall. Fitting, Xyla thought. They crept up the spiral servant stairs, the sounds of the coronation growing louder. "And so we commit the soul of Xyla Frostborn to the ice," Zevran's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "A tragedy, a failure of leadership. But fear not. I shall carry the burden." Adalind and Xyla reached the heavy velvet curtains behind the throne. Through the gap, they could see the entire court assembled. Zevran stood on the dais, wearing the heavy fur mantle of the Alpha. Briella stood next to him, holding the crown of bone. "Do you swear," Briella intoned, her voice silky and dangerous, "to bind the pack to your will? To crush dissent? To rule by blood?" "I swear," Zevran smirked, bowing his head to receive the crown. "Wait for the moment," Adalind whispered, her hand gripping Xyla's arm. "Not yet." Briella lifted the crown. The court held its breath. "Then I crown you. I object." The voice didn't come from behind the curtain. It came from the main doors of the great hall. The doors blew inward with a massive crash. Standing there was not Xyla, but General Kael, the man Xyla had hoped to reach. He was flanked by 50 loyal soldiers, swords drawn. "Kael!" Zevran snarled, his face paling. "This is treason!" "Treason is murdering a king," Kael roared. "We found the bodies at the lake, Zevran. We found the traces of earth magic," Briella hissed, spinning around. "Kill them!" she shrieked to the royal guard. Chaos erupted. The hall turned into a battlefield. Loyalists clashed with Zevran's mercenaries. "Now," Adalind said. Xyla ripped the curtain aside. He didn't need a weapon. He was the weapon. He leaped from the dais, landing directly between Zevran and the fighting below. The impact cracked the marble floor. The entire hall froze. Xyla stood tall, the void talons pulsing with blue light. He was dirty, smelling of sewers and river water. But he looked more regal than Zevran ever could in his silks. "Hello, cousin," Xyla said, his voice deadly calm. Zevran stumbled back, tripping over his ceremonial robes. "Ghost! You're a ghost." "I am the winter," Xyla growled. He raised a gauntleted hand. "And winter has come for you." Briella screamed, raising her staff. "Die!" A torrent of green fire erupted from her staff, aiming straight for Xyla's chest. Adalind didn't think. She moved. She wasn't a soldier, but she was quick. She threw a heavy silver candelabra at Briella, ruining her aim. The fire went wide, scorching Xyla's cloak but missing his flesh. "Adalind!" Xyla shouted, terrified for her. "Get the witch!" Adalind yelled, dodging a sword swing from a guard. She grabbed a discarded spear and swept the guard's legs. "I'll handle the rat!" Adalind turned her eyes to Zevran. The usurper king was fumbling for his sword. Adalind advanced on him, her spear leveled. "This is for my father," she said, her voice shaking with rage. The battle for the throne room was a blur of steel and magic. Xyla charged Briella. The witch was powerful, summoning vines from the stone floor to ensnare him, hurling bolts of acid. But the void talons were hungry. Every time a spell hit Xyla's gauntlets, the blue meteor glass flared, absorbing the energy. Xyla waded through the magic like a man walking through a strong wind. "Impossible!" Briella shrieked, backing up toward the stained glass windows. "That armor was lost!" "Found it!" Xyla grunted. He reached out, grabbing the vines wrapping around his legs. The gauntlets flashed, and the magic in the plants died, turning them to grey ash. He closed the distance. Briella swung her staff. Xyla caught it in one armored hand. Crack! He crushed the weirwood staff like a dry twig. The magical feedback sent Briella flying backward, slamming into the stone wall. She slid down, unconscious, her power severed. On the other side of the dais, Adalind was fighting for her life. Zevran was not a good king, but he was a trained warrior. He battered Adalind's spear aside with heavy, brutal swings of his broadsword. Adalind was fast, dodging and weaving, but she was tiring. "You're just a beta bitch!" Zevran spat, cornering her against the throne. "You should have died in the snow like your father." He raised his sword for a killing blow. Adalind had nowhere to go. She braced herself, holding the spear up in a futile block. Thwack! Zevran froze. He looked down. A black arrow was protruding from his chest. He looked up. Across the room, General Kyle lowered a bow. But the arrow hadn't come from him. Zevran turned slowly. Standing at the side entrance, battered and bloody but alive, was the old pack mother, the oldest wolf in the city, whom Zevran had dismissed as senile. She held a crossbow. Zevran dropped his sword. He looked at Adalind, blood bubbling at his lips. "He will never love you," Zevran gargled. "He is king." He fell face first onto the steps of the throne. Adalind dropped her spear, gasping for breath. The hall went silent. The fighting stopped. Zevran was dead. The witch was defeated. Xyla stood in the center of the carnage. His chest heaved. The blue light in the gauntlets faded. He looked at the crowd. The nobles, the soldiers, the servants. They were all staring at him with a mixture of fear and awe. Then, slowly, General Kale dropped to one knee. "The king lives," Kyle announced. One by one, the room knelt. Even the traitors, seeing the wind change, fell to their knees. All except Adalind. She stood by the throne, alone, separated from Xyla by a sea of kneeling subjects. She looked at him, the Alpha King, restored, powerful, surrounded by his court, and she realized with a breaking heart that the adventure was over. The cabin, the cave, the river. That was a world where they could be equals. Here he was, the sun, and she was just a shadow. Xyla met her gaze. He saw the resignation in her eyes. He saw her turning to leave, to slip back into the anonymity of an exile. "No," Xyla said. His voice wasn't a roar. It was a statement of fact. He walked through the kneeling crowd. He didn't stop at the throne. He walked past it, straight to Adalind. He stopped inches from her. He was covered in grime, blood, and dark magic. He looked terrifying, and he looked at her like she was the only water in a desert. "Adalind Moorcrest," he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "You saved my life 3 times. You saved my soul once. You are the daughter of Harek, the truest beta this kingdom ever knew." Adalind trembled. "Xyla, don't. The court will never accept." Xyla stripped off the gauntlets. They clattered loudly to the floor. He took her hands in his own. Bare, scarred hands. "I am the Alpha," he said fiercely. "I do not ask the court what they accept. I tell them what is." He knelt. The entire hall gasped. The Alpha King never knelt. "I offer you the position of Beta," Xyla said, his eyes locking with hers. "But that is not enough. I offer you my life. I offer you the hunt. I offer you the crown." He pulled a ring from his finger, the signet of the Frostborn. "Will you be my mate? Will you be my queen? Not behind me. Beside me." Adalind looked at the man who had once been her enemy. She saw the boy who had been manipulated, the warrior who had shielded her from the fall, the king who was willing to beg in front of his army. She smiled, tears tracking through the dirt on her face. "Get up, you fool," she whispered, pulling him to his feet. "You're getting your knees dirty." She kissed him, and this time the cheers that erupted shook the snow from the roof of the palace. The winter that followed was harsh, but the spring that came after was the warmest in living memory. King Xyla and Queen Adalind didn't just rebuild the kingdom. They reshaped it. The crypts were sealed, but the truth of the past was taught in schools. Harek Moorcrest's name was cleared, his statue erected in the square where he had once been condemned. Adalind never stopped being the girl who pulled wolves from the water. She established the Reach Rescue, a corps of elite soldiers dedicated to finding the lost, the stranded, and the hopeless in the wilds. Fate is a funny thing. It can drown you, freeze you, and break you. But sometimes, if you are stubborn enough to hold on to the rope, it pulls you exactly where you need to be. Love, after all, is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding the one person you are willing to bleed for, freeze for, and burn the world down to save. If you enjoyed this story of survival, betrayal, and a love that melted the ice, please like, share, and subscribe for more epic romances. Let me know in the comments, would you have saved the enemy?